doesn't love a map that tells you all the things that you should be avoiding. Today, we're going to talk about 3 things that you should avoid if you want that cervix to dilate faster and ultimately make labor a little bit faster. These are things that I've seen with my thousands of patients in my 20 years in labor and delivery, along with having 3 babies of my own and talking to millions of patients online. I'm so glad that you guys are here because this is really helpful information and I want you to avoid these things. So let's jump into it. The number one thing is stress. Now, mental stress I would like you to avoid, but there's going to be one other type of stress that I want to avoid as well, and ultimately just relaxing. So this is your pelvis. We know that your uterus resides inside of your pelvis, but you may not know that there's like a bowl of muscles in here called your pelvic floor. Some people call it your pelvic girdle, that helps suspend your uterus, your bladder, your rectum. So important. Huge fan of the pelvic floor. If it's watching, I fangirl for you all the time. In fact, still working on my pelvic floor 16 years later after my last baby. But the pelvic floor, can tense up, right? That's sort of what a Kegel is. But when you're in pain, think about when you've been in a lot of pain, is your first reaction to be like, oh, I love this so much, to just relax? No, it's to tense up, right? You break your leg, you're grabbing for it, you're tensing up those muscles. That is our natural reaction to pain. But if you have that same reaction to pain in your pelvic floor, it's going to make it so that your uterus, this cervix down here, isn't going to be able to relax and let this baby come out into the birth canal, which is what we ultimately want. So learning to relax even when you're in pain is so important. I think everybody needs some natural pain management, even if you're planning on an epidural. I have a birth class that does just that. I'm going to link it down below. And I do think that learning breathing is one of the best ways to get this pelvic floor to relax. And they do that in that class. And I would encourage you to make sure that you're practicing it outside of the class, even with ligament pains or anything else that's going on. It can be really, really helpful. Side note, I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about Kegels, or maybe this was just me before I had babies, but we don't talk as much about relaxing that pelvic floor. And while I love a good Kegel, learning to relax it just as important, if not more important. The next thing that you should avoid is staying in one spot. If you're just laying on your bed, then your baby has one way to attempt their way into the birth canal. But if you are flipping from side to side, baby has other ways that they can attempt to go down to the birth canal. If you are walking, you got your pelvis kind of shifting this way. If you're curb walking, you got this, baby's going to fall right out. It's not going to do that. But all the things that you're doing in your pelvis, especially early on, really help baby find their best way out. I actually just saw a midwife on social media talking about how early in pregnancy, it's like wiggling a cork. And I loved that analogy because it's these small movements that are really just kind of slowly helping that baby find their way into the pelvis. And then once you get into active labor, it's bigger movements that are kind of pushing baby along. But I like that wiggling cork analogy, which is why I recommend, you're moving every 30 minutes unless you're asleep. I love being asleep because it helps with that previous one, relaxing. But, what kind of movements are you doing? I think that this is an awesome one for partners to help with because when you're in pain or like all the nervous energy of labor, sometimes you forget, to move and like where you could be moving, like your brain's just sort of blank. So it's a great one for partners to do. I got to say early labor can be a little bit scary for partners, right? They think ultimately that the hospital is going to deal with your birth if you're here with the pregnancy nurse where we talk about hospital birth. But you're going to manage a little bit of that labor on your own at home. So giving both you and your partner skills and techniques on managing early labor, what you can do, best things to help it progress. Again, the birth class that I recommend actually has an early labor section where she talks about all that. So helpful. And when I say she, I mean me. It's my birth class, but it is the one that I recommend. And thousands of couples have recommended it as well. The last thing to avoid, and this is especially in the early labor, is reading too much into it. I see people who have 2 contractions and are immediately getting out that contraction timer. They're like, one was 22 minutes apart, the next one was 34 minutes apart. And I'm like, girl, chill out. Again, it's not helping the relaxing, but the more you stress out about like, am I in labor? Is this the contractions? The less likely you are for that oxytocin to flow. By the way, I have a whole post on my website about letting oxytocin flow. I'll link it down below. But you got to remember that oxytocin is the love hormone. And I think we all know that we don't show a lot of love when we're stressed out. So the more you can just be like, oh, maybe that's labor, but I'm going to kind of ignore it in early labor can be really helpful. Again, keep moving. probably put some things in your hospital bag. I think all of those things are fine, but obsessively timing contractions, wondering if you should check your own cervix, things like that might not be helpful, might not help it progress and help your cervix dilate. Labor is super, super tricky. In fact, there are 3 things in our bodies that have to agree that say, yep, it's time for labor. I'm actually going to link the video where I talk about that up above and down below. Thanks for joining us here on The Pregnancy Nurse, where we get you prepared, not scared for your upcoming hospital birth.